Hey, everybody, and welcome to episode 31 of Facts on the Ground. My name is Misty Winston, and I am joined as always by my co-host, Jesse Zerwell. Today, we're very excited to have Morgan Artyukhina, who is a return guest. She's been on a couple of different times. They are a journalist and writer at Sputnik News, and also autistic, socialist, trans activist badass. So we are very excited to have them on to discuss a topic that has been in the news recently. We had Tulsi Gabbard introduce a bill on Title IX. And so we wanted to talk to somebody about the bill, what it means, its implications for trans youth and trans athletes. And so Morgan has a piece out in Sputnik that we will link to in the show notes that kind of goes through the issue from a trans woman's point of view. So we're very excited to have them here to discuss this. So Morgan, thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure.
So I wanted to just really kind of give people an idea of what Title IX is, and you know, kind of what it was originally intended to do and those sort of things. Give sort of a historical background so that people kind of know where all of this is coming from. So can you just kind of give like a brief, I don't know, like synopsis of the history of Title IX?
Yeah, well, basically Title IX is part of a larger 1972 law, and what it does is it protects against sex-based discrimination in institutional settings, particularly education, and things having to do with schools and stuff. This kind of comes 1972. It comes on the tail end of, you know, more than a decade of, you know, militant feminist protest and organizing that began with a kind of very you know, liberal, the feminine mystique kind of stuff, you know, kind of addressing like the right of women to participate fully in society rather than being confined to the role of housewife and mother and you know, kind of being this strangling, you know, kind of role. Think about like the 1950s, you know, Mrs. Cleaver, you know, stereotype. Women were rebelling against that kind of thing. As well as other things too, inequalities in wage, inequalities in hiring and firing practices, you know, fighting against harassment, fighting for abortion rights. 1972 is also when when the Roe versus Wade case was argued. The ruling was just a couple days into 1973 in January. So this was really that kind of time. We also have the radical feminists, you know, who were really kind of talking about challenging the basis of gender roles, and they kind of almost took a pseudo-Marxist approach where they said that you know, women are an oppressed class and they have to liberate themselves from the domination of men and stuff. And there's the socialist feminist movement at the same time. So there's all these kind of movements that are looking at like what is the basis of women's oppression and what actions can we take to undo some of those historic limitations on women's equal participation in society. So that's where that bill comes, where that law comes from. And what it does in terms of education is it protects, as I said, women's right to equally access all the things that men have access to in education, including sports facilities and participation in sports. And it's because of Title IX that we have a lot of, you know, women's sports and stuff that are women's leagues and all those kinds of things kind of came about because of that, or heavily supported by that. So that's really where this law comes from.
And Title IX is really, it did wonders for female sports. You know, prior to it being passed, there weren't women's athletics teams in colleges at all. You know, they would have some intramural leagues, and it was like, you know, we're like rounding up 15 people to like go have a game. They often had to buy their own uniforms and pay for their own bus tickets and all of those sorts of things. And so there wasn't any, you know, real organized women's sports teams in colleges. And after this passed, there was an explosion of, you know, female athletes getting to participate in, you know, real college sports. And just from my own perspective, I grew up as an athlete. I played sports my entire life. And so just knowing the experiences that I had and was able to have because of Title IX, the idea behind it is definitely solid. I definitely think that it has done a wonderful thing for, and again, it's not just for sports, but I think particularly it had a huge impact on, female athletics for sure. But I think that over the course of time, there's been a lot of, as there is with anything, there's been a lot of reevaluating it and rewriting it, adding to it, things like that. And I think that's kind of where we find ourselves today. I think that I kind of forget where I was going with this point. But I think that in general, Title IX is a good thing. But with Tulsi's bill now, well, I guess first we should talk about what Tulsi's bill is addressing. So do you want to kind of talk about sort of what her take on this whole thing is, as far as transgender women being included in sports?
So
Yeah, and I'll just
sorry.
jump in and add that she's in collaboration with Representative Mark Wayne. That's all one word, all one name. Never seen that name before. Mark Wayne Mullen, a Republican from Oklahoma. She's in collaboration with him to push through the Protect Women's Sports Act. So that's what we're asking Morgan about currently.
Yes.
Yeah, so well, the title of the bill kind of pretty well frames how they see the argument, which is that that somehow including trans women in women's sports is a threat to women's sports, and what the bill does is it would add language to Title IX that would specify that the protection is not based on sex, it's based on sex assigned at birth, which would mean that trans women who are assigned male at birth would be excluded a priori from any participation in women's sports or anything protected by Title IX. So the reason that they do this is they argue that trans women have some kind of innate biological superiority over cisgender women. And cisgender is just the opposite of trans, right? These are Latin prefixes. If you think about the Roman Empire, there was Transalpine Gaul, which was the part of Gaul that was on the other side. You had to cross over the Alpines, the Alps to get to that part of Gaul. And the part of Gaul that was closer to Rome was called Cisalpine Gaul. So cis, trans, that's just where this term comes from. Sometimes people get touchy about like, don't label me, I don't know what cisgender means. That's all it means. It just means you're not trans. So the attitude is that trans women are biologically men and thus have some kind of innate physical superiority to cisgender women who are biologically female. So that's the argument, is like that including trans women in women's sports would like result in either danger to cisgender women, because like we would like be a physical danger and like overpower them, and it would be like they're playing against a man, or that like trans women are going to swoop in and steal all of the medals. We're going to steal all of the medals, set all of the records, and we're just going to like erase, the accomplishments or whatever of cisgender women and just take it all over. And this is justified by a number of kind of really ridiculous stereotypes that have really come about as like really harmful stereotypes that are based on kind of disingenuous understandings of what trans women are and what it means to be trans. I think, for example, there was an episode of South Park where there was a trans woman who was a football player and was like big, bulk, hunky, and it was like that character, but like, I think they had makeup on or something, and they were like, I'm a woman. And it's obviously supposed to be like, just kind of making fun of like this notion that like men can be women or whatever. Like it's and that's the kind of way that it's framed, and they can pick a couple big examples of like I don't remember people's names because I'm not really that into sports, but there was like a trans woman who was a volleyball player, who was like 6'1" or something, and like she's tall, and strong,
As are most volleyball players who are.
Yeah, most volleyball players are pretty tall.
Right, and that's the thing is like they kind of cherry pick these things, and what it really.
Okay, so wait.
Sorry,
can I interrupt you? Can I interrupt you
no,
really quickly? Because I want to like really. Yeah, I really want to dive into this because like Jesse and I were speaking before we called you, and I to be honest, like I don't really know where I stand because I mean I'm honestly a little bit ignorant about this issue. It's not something I've ever really thought about that deeply, I guess. I mean, obviously that's my my privilege. It doesn't affect me, so it's not, do you know what I'm saying? Like, so it like I understand that argument to a certain degree. Like it makes sense on its face. Like, oh, well, if you're biologically born male, then maybe you would be a little bit taller, maybe you would be a little bit stronger. But it also I really just want to dive into that because that seems like where most of the confusion and argument comes from, that they're the unfair advantage thing. So I really want to dive into that and talk about why that matters. Because, I watched an interview with somebody and the guy was like 6 foot tall and he's like, listen, if I wanted to be a jockey, like a horse racing jockey, I couldn't. I'm too tall. My own personal experience, I'm 5'9". When I was 8, I really wanted to be a gymnast. And they were like, you're going to be too tall for this sport. And so it feels like while that argument makes sense, there's also plenty of examples where, just biologically, you're not cut out for a certain sport. Somebody who's 5'1" probably isn't going to be able to play basketball. Like we said, volleyball players are all very tall. If you're short, you're probably not going to make the volleyball team. So I really want to dive into that and like get at why that argument doesn't make sense. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, and sorry,
ahead,
Morgan. Just before you answer, I just wanted to add that the Tulsi Gabbard bill that we're talking about, this is essentially the introduction summary, and I think any fair-minded person would agree that it sounds like language from the Dark Ages. And I just want to put this into context, whether you agree with it or disagree with it.
And just really quickly before you read that, Jesse, I just want to say, like, I'm for sure going to get called a transphobe after this. And I've been called a transphobe already just because I support other legislation that Tulsi has written. I'm not. I just don't know enough about this. That's why I'm really excited to be having this conversation with somebody smarter than me, because I want to learn more about what this means. So this isn't me like being trans. I don't want trans women to be excluded. That's horrible. I mean, when I was growing up, being part of a team and playing sports was a huge part of my life. It gives you, that sense of belonging and camaraderie, and everybody should be able to experience that. So, I mean, this is not, I just want to understand. And I think that there's a lot of emotion in this. And I think that people need to just take a deep breath and listen, and that's like, I just want to listen and learn more about it so that I can form an opinion. I mean, obviously I don't want trans women to be excluded. But, I just want to learn more about it so I can figure out, what all this means and because I think it's a very complex issue.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
well, I think that's the thing is that there's not a lot of facts going around about this, and there's a whole lot of fear mongering going around.
Yes.
So people don't it kind of requires you to really think about the issue in a different way. So if you are kind of casually encountering a lot of these things, then maybe you know what I mean? Like, I think it's very easy for people to adopt that position just because of like the way that things get framed. So if you don't actually really get an honest perception, of the issue to really make a balanced evaluation of it. So,
yeah.
You actually gave me a really good example and didn't even realize it. Miss, did you say you're 5'9"?
Yes.
Okay, you're 3 inches taller than me. I'm 5'6".
That's what I mean. It's like the unfair advantage thing. It's that seems silly because I mean I've played sports with girls who were 6'2", and were very muscular. And I've played sports with girls who were tiny, and it seemed like that seems like a very weak argument to make. Like on its face, like I said, on its face, like that makes sense. Like I could see somebody being presented with that argument and being like, yeah, totally, that's not fair. But then when you look past the surface level, it becomes a different thing. And that's why, like I said, I'm really excited to be having this conversation, because I think that this is one of those topics that people just get really fired up about without looking at it like for what it is. And like you said, there's a lot of misinformation and fear mongering. And I'm embarrassed that this isn't something that I've ever looked into before. I mean, I know that we can't all be educated on every single issue ever brought up, like there's plenty of things I don't, know about. But just from a female athlete perspective, like I'm excited to like kind of dive into this and figure out like what it actually means, not the crap that gets thrown out there, but like what it really means, because this is an important thing, I think. This is it like the top priority of the country right now? No, obviously. It's a little weird that this is a bill that Tulsi puts out right now anyway. But it certainly does impact a lot. And for me, especially, like I said, I'm mostly concerned with trans youth. Being excluded in that way at that age and they already are, just for being who they are. It makes me really sad, because like I said, being part of a team and playing sports growing up was an awesome experience for me. And I think that any kid who wants to have that experience should be able to do so. So yeah, I mean, I'm just glad that we're talking about it. I don't really care if people want to call me names or whatever. I'm just here to learn. So I'm just glad that we can do this and have like a nuanced discussion about it.
Yeah,
Well,
before we even got started, I was already getting names thrown at me in the comments, just when you guys were like, we're going to be talking about this thing, and they were like, how dare you talk about this thing?
Yeah.
So,
that's what I mean. It's like this weird, and there are lots of these. I mean, abortion's one of those issues. People don't, it's like this emotionally driven thing. And I want to cut through that bullshit and just look at it for what it is. And I'm not saying that we're going to like solve the problem here today, but mostly I just want to learn, and I want to give, other people, because I'm sure there are plenty of other people who are in my situation who are just kind of figuring out what this means and where they stand. So I think that that's an okay thing. Yeah, Jesse, did you want to read that real quick? Sorry, we got totally sidetracked again.
That's okay. That's okay. So this is essentially the preamble to the bill that Tulsi Gabbard and Mark Wayne, I forget his last name. Let's just say it's Gacy. To provide that for purposes of determining compliance with Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972 in athletics, sex shall be determined on the basis of biological sex as determined at birth by a physician, which I read as something or
so
something
ridiculous.
that strikes me as something that strikes me from the dark ages. So I think that being the preamble and the way it by default limits the scope of the argument and pretty much tells you right there what the bill is going to be about. I think it's
it
not
feels
only
like an erasure.
It's not only ignorance and an ignorance I can't understand, because I thought Tulsi Gabbard was smart, but apparently not. But it's also just a very confining, a very draconian, if you will, way to approach this. And I don't understand why this has become so important to her. Not that it's not an important issue, but I think she's totally wrong on this one. That's my point of view. And Morgan, maybe you can talk about what you think about that introduction and what you think about the bill itself.
I mean, I think that cisgender women should be insulted by that notion. What she says is that biologically women are inferior to men, and then that is the defining feature of womanhood, and that's how she wants to define it. And you're right. I mean, it is from the Dark Ages. It is from a bygone era, but it's also remains one of the fundamentals of this society. The rights that trans people have, we have fought for, and in many places that's not the case. But I guess the thing is really that the framing is fundamentally wrong from basic kind of what Misty was talking about, in terms of like, yes, if you think about like the spectrum of like the tallest man to the shortest man, and the tallest woman to the shortest woman, the strongest man to the weakest man, kind of those maybe at the extremes, like the most like capable, like the strongest man is probably stronger than the strongest woman, that I don't know that, but that's probably the case. But the thing is, the framing of it makes it sound like you've got women and then men, and it's like this, and it makes it sound like the strongest woman is still weaker than the weakest man.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, that's really what the framing is. When in reality, they're not like this. They overlap extensively. Like you said, there are men who are 5'2". There are men who are 6'2". There are women who are 5'2". There are women who are 6'2". So there's this enormous overlap. Like I said, I'm a trans woman. Stereotypically, you would think that I would be like 6 foot, 5'11", something like that, or whatever. I'm not. I'm 5'6". I weigh $140 soaking wet. Like, I'm not, but I'm also like a very athletic person. And so there's many levels to this issue. One is the framing of like women are inferior to men, and therefore like this matchup will always be inferior. Because that's the thing, is like maybe me and Misty, we go up against each other on the field hockey field, and it's like, or volleyball or whatever, and it's like, okay, which one of us has a biological advantage at that point? Like, Misty's going to reach the ball before I do. You know what I mean? So like at that, you know what I mean? So it's like when you kind of really think about what does it actually mean in practice.
That's going to happen once COVID finally goes away. That's going to happen. There's going to be a field hockey showdown between Misty and Morgan. So.
Oh, at least it won't. At least it won't be a volleyball one. But that's a good point.
I'm pretty sure I got you on volleyball.
I've
never played field hockey, but
well, I haven't either. But I did play lacrosse, so I was kind of hoping it would be the same. But yeah, no, I might have a chance on field hockey, but definitely not with volleyball.
Yeah,
and that's a good example. You know what I mean? Like, do you need protection from big scary me for that? You know what I mean? It always picks on like the most extreme and ridiculous stereotype to make these things sound plausible. It's like the South Park episode where like the football hunk comes out as trans. Not that a football hunk couldn't come out as trans. I'm just saying, like, most trans women are not that. But even then, there's another, because there's many elements to this that really kind of get tangled up in this. What she's really alleging is that, and this has actually been made clear because she's not alone in this. Kelly Loeffler introduced almost this identical bill in the Senate a couple months ago, and this bill has been introduced, or bills doing almost the same thing based on this same premise, have been introduced in 14 state legislatures in the past year alone. So this is a thing that is like a conservative, drumbeat that is part of this scare across the country. The other half is what you were talking about, Misty, which is the giving people them trying to criminalize doctors giving affirming medical care to trans kids and what that means, or treating kids in schools, the way they want to be treated. They've also tried to ban that, and that's a separate issue, but just saying that's part of like the scare thing. A couple years ago, it was bathroom bills, right? It was, you don't want to encounter a trans woman in the bathroom because she might be a rapist in a dress. or whatever. And like, again, it builds on
Sorry,
this
I'm just
absolutely
laughing at people who
absurd
actually
premise.
think that.
But that was
Well,
the thing.
that's
That was
actually
the scare thing. And now this is
I-
a big scare thing. First they were coming for you in the bathroom. Now they're coming for you on the athletic field.
and
Like
that's
On
actually
the
I
turf,
heard
Theo.
okay, so I watched
you got it.
yeah, I watched an I don't know what show Piers Morgan, who's an epic douche canoe hosts in the UK, but they had a discussion about this. I was trying to watch and read everything I could leading up to this, because again, this is not something I've really ever thought like much about. So I'm like in my infancy here. But Piers Morgan made that same argument, not with the bathroom thing, but he was saying, what's to stop, a man who, knows that he's like the worst player on the team, on the men's team, to just decide that he's gonna, identify as a woman and then go and have this amazing career and make lots of money, and then just decide that he's gonna go back to being a man afterwards. And that's just so ridiculous to me.
Yeah.
But I mean, is it possible that that could happen? Sure, I guess it is. I mean, I'm sure that there are all kinds of, ridiculous people out there who will go to any lengths to, I don't know. I'm sure it's possible, but
And
it just seems
a
like such.
person who does something like that would be shamed forever. They
Right.
would be
And it's
outcast. They would probably have their stuff taken away from them because it was disingenuous. You know what I
yes,
mean?
yes,
So like, it's a
yeah,
totally
Yeah.
contrived circumstance. Like, this has never happened
yes.
before. It's
And
just
he's talking about something that might happen, like it's not even something that's happened. And he's talking about something that maybe we might see one person attempt.
It
And so he's willing
he
to throw out the entire argument or the entire topic because of this one like hypothetical situation that one person may try to do at some point. It's so silly.
yeah,
But
and
as
he
far as the language in the preamble, to me, and I'm hoping you can speak to this. To me, when Jesse read that out loud, like I've read it myself, but when he read it out loud, to me it's like an erasure. It erases trans women, because to me trans women are women. And so to say that you can only be a woman if you are biologically born a woman is really ridiculous to me. And so it feels very much like this bill and the two co-sponsors are just completely erasing trans women in their existence. Is that kind of like what you feel from that as a trans woman?
yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Because what it does is it says trans women aren't women, they're men
Yeah.
who think that they're women, or
Or
call
who
themselves
are
women.
identifying.
We have to humor them.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what that whole language of like identify as really becomes kind of more of a burden than it's really worth, because trans women are women. The accomplishments of trans women are the accomplishments of women. Like, this is the same argument that white women made about black women, okay, and made about Latina women, and could make about any, about lesbians or whatever. Like, this has just been recycled over and over. This idea that if we include this other category of woman in the category of womanhood, that this somehow is a taint to what womanhood has meant and means. You know what I mean?
which is
So-
totally arbitrary.
Right. And I mean, the thing is, like I said, well, like you said too, that this, it defines people in biological terms. And now there's no doubt that humans reproduce in a specific way, that you need certain parts and they have to match up with other certain parts. But that's the biology. The biology is just, when you want to reproduce, when you want to make a baby, this is the stuff you have to have. Everything else, the identity, the names, the roles, everything else is decided by humans. We decided that having a penis and producing sperm is the body of what we call a man, and that having a uterus and being able to grow a baby inside of you, that's called a woman. And we decided that that's what those were. Nature didn't decide that. Nature created two bodies. We created the gender and the roles and the social structures and all of this stuff. So what they do is they get this all tangled up, and they say that these things are biologically defined, and actually it's we defined them by biology. And like I said, I mean, cis women should be insulted by this, because this is something. This is not an. She frames this. Tulsi Gabbard frames this as an issue as a feminist issue. We have to defend this feminist accomplishment, Title IX, from men who are endangering it. That's how she frames it. But the argument that she makes, as you pointed out, Jesse, is the exact argument that the feminists who fought for Title IX spent decades fighting against. You know, like
Right.
There was a radical feminist thinker named Andrea Dworkin, and she embraced trans women, and actually a lot of female activists, a lot of feminist activists embraced trans women for a period of time until this backlash came, which actually looked a lot like this, where they were claiming that like trans women were like men colonizing women's bodies and dumb shit like that. Claimed that trans women brought this innate maleness, you know, to women's spaces, and that we were corrupting them in that way. And that kind of turned the feminist community against trans women for a long time. But before that, you had people like Dworkin who were embracing trans women into the feminist movement and saying trans women are so valuable to us because we disprove once and for all the biological argument that is the basis of patriarchy, that is the basis of men claiming that they have the right to rule over women and are superior to women and decide things, you know. And so the biological superiority, you know, meaning the physical superiority, is a part of that component. But also it's the genders, you know, sex is defined by biology, and therefore women are doomed to be baby makers. And that was what everyone was rebelling against in the 60s and the 70s. What feminists were fighting for the right of women not to be identified as, was to not be known as a baby maker. If you want to have a baby, that's great. You know, if you don't, you're not a failure as a woman because you choose to not have a baby, or because you're sterile and can't have a baby, or because your life doesn't allow you to have a baby. That doesn't make you less of a woman, you know? And so trans women were just kind of the final nail in the coffin of saying, like, look, if trans women get treated like cis women do, we face all of the violence, we face all of the discrimination, we face all of the sexism and the misogynist stereotypes, we face all of that and more, but we don't have this biological thing. What's more important? Is it this technical biological technicality, or is it the social implications of being a woman? And so that's really even today still the fundamental basis of including trans women in feminism, is that women don't want to be defined by biology, you know? So that we fought a long time to not be defined by that. And that's really what this bill does. This bill doubles down on that definition, and imagines that it's protecting women. But it's only protecting women in the same way that, like, misogynists imagine, you know, patriarchs imagine that they're protecting women, because they say that women are too weak to protect themselves. So they're like, well, we're protecting women, you know. And that's the thing, is this happened with the bathroom bills too. There was this notion of, like, men need to step up and defend women against other men, which what that meant was men need to go beat up trans women who use women's bathrooms, you know, like. And I'll be honest with you, I'm scared to use the women's bathroom a lot of the time. I have, and this is true of all trans people, we have a categorical memory of all of the places in town where there are gender-neutral restrooms, because it is scary, you know?
Yeah.
When I travel to other states, I have to learn the laws. When I cross the Potomac River into Virginia, will I still be able to use the bathroom of my gender, or they're going to expect me to use the men's bathroom? You know, what kind of danger does that put me in? And that's another aspect to this too, is so you want trans women to play men's sports where we'll never win anything. Because the thing is, you know, most trans women take hormone therapy, and what that does is, there's two components to it. One is a testosterone blocker that shuts down your body's production of testosterone.
So just to give context, this is known as HRT, or hormone replacement replacement
which is
therapy.
actually the term actually originally comes for postmenopausal women. And that's the funny thing, is that my mom, who is postmenopausal and was going through menopause when I came out and started transitioning, her and I are on the same medication, which is estradiol, which is a biologically identical estrogen. So yeah, we take the one to suppress the testosterone, and then we take the estrogen to supply your body with estrogen, and that puts us through a puberty, the same that a biological, quote unquote, biological woman would have. Things grow, fat gets redistributed, and as a corresponding factor, a lot of the other stuff that comes from testosterone begins to dwindle as well. Not just sexual function, but also muscle and the functioning of muscles, like your heart, for example. And I talk about in the article because the thing is, there hasn't been a lot of studies about the athletic abilities and the impact that hormone therapy and the differences between trans women and cis women has. But there are some things I talk about in the article. Like, for example, one study found that years of hormone therapy causes the heart muscle to, I don't want to say weaken, because it doesn't like hurt your heart, but it has to pump harder. When it pumps, it doesn't pump as much blood as it used to before you started the hormone therapy. So that translates into decreased athletic performance. So I might, and that's the thing, is I've experienced this because I'm a runner. I run 4 or 5 days a week. And I, before, I ran before I was transitioning, I ran while I was transitioning. And I mean, transitioning doesn't really end. You don't stop taking the hormones, but I am now, having been transitioning for 4 years. And so I've experienced that physical, change. And I mean, it's gotten harder. I'm not the athlete that I was 4 or 5 years ago. And that's not just because I'm 33 now. It's because of that too. A lot of muscles, in my body have atrophied, and it's become that much harder to kind of, even to maintain them, much less to stop them from kind of atrophying a little bit. So there's, and that's as someone who is an athlete. I don't compete professionally or anything, or anything like that, or even intramurally. But I mean, I am still an athlete who, judges myself against what I'm capable of, and I've seen a decline in my performance in that. So that's, those are just some of the impacts that this stuff can have. So even if you are worried about a physical superiority in strength or capability or whatever, those things are going to be affected by hormone therapy as well. However,
and I think that there's actually, I read or watched an interview with someone who said that it actually can, and I'm sure that the hormones affect every person differently. I mean, that's just the nature of being a human. I mean, medicines, medications, all of those things affect everybody in a different way. But for the most part, this person said that it actually
too.
Yes.
That's the thing. This is just a second puberty.
Right. But the person, I wish I could remember their name because they were brilliant, but they were saying that it could, in some cases, and again, you said there aren't a lot of studies on this, but it could actually put you at a disadvantage because it negatively impacts some of the things. I forget, I think they were saying that there's not your level of testosterone, just, I mean, women have testosterone too, it's just naturally occurring. But I mean, it just like every person is different, it makes the levels could drop even lower than a biologically born woman. So I'm glad that you brought up hormone replacement therapy, because I think that that's something that, needs to be talked about with this. And I know that I know that each, the NCAA has its own requirements. I think theirs is you have to be on HRT for at least a year before you're allowed to participate in the gender that you identify as, whatever that means. But it seems like there isn't a general consensus of what that is. Should there be restrictions on, if you are a trans woman And it feels like this conversation is only had about trans women participating in female sports and not the other way around. Probably for, obvious reasons, but do you think that there should be restrictions at all on people participating in female sports? Because that's something I'm like, should there even be restrictions on that? Because again, to me, a trans woman is a woman. So shouldn't you just be allowed to participate without any, guidelines, or you have to do this, or you have to meet this requirement, or take this medicine for this long, or whatever? Like that's, to me, that's very unclear what that whole thing means.
I mean, in my opinion, I don't think that they should have those requirements, because the problem is, where do they end? Like you said,
Right.
cisgender women naturally have testosterone in their bodies, because just like cisgender men naturally have estrogen in their bodies, because our bodies naturally make both of these things, and because we need them to function, but again, I think the thing is, you wind up defining women as like the absence of maleness. You know what I mean? Or male, as the absence of femaleness.
Lesser than.
Right. It's like
Yeah.
it's like you've got this thing that taints you,
Right.
But also, there are many cis women. Like, for example, my wife has PCOS, which means that she has a naturally a higher than normal amount of testosterone in her body, So, like, based on that, and that's a very common condition that cis women have. So, like, would she pass that test? Would you have a woman like, Caster Semenya, who is an incredible athlete, cisgender woman, who just happens to naturally have, like, at what point are you invading the natural properties of cisgender women by creating a box in which proper cisgender women exist? And who is that box being based around? I mean, this is why I come back to, again, pointing out that, like, this box of womanhood is a box of white womanhood. This is a box of European womanhood. And that's why this is, again, such a problem for many people other than trans women, is because it forces all women, cis women too, even white cis women, into this box where this is the proper way to be a woman, and everything outside of it, you're a failure in some way. You're not adequately female enough. You know what I mean? And so it's like,
Right.
What is that definition? And that definition, as we said, is this notion that women are defined as inferior to men. That, like, and this is the thing, this is what happens to trans women quite a bit, actually. And I mean, you can see this happens to like non-white women too. The way it's held against us. You're too loud to be a woman. You curse too much to be a woman. Your voice is deep. You have hair on your face. This or that. Like, every single thing that you can imagine is held against us. Because we don't fit that model of cis white womanhood in various ways, So
Well, and it also kind of like, okay, so they want to define this little box of what is womanhood. Well, who is they? Who's deciding what the definition of woman is? Who gets to make that call?
Well, the people who are trying to do it are infotainment nabobs like Piers Morgan, who think that they have some kind of knowledge because they speak loudly and aggressively about this issue. And actually, Piers Morgan appearing on Tucker Carlson was the first time I encountered this issue about a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago. And his argument was, in my opinion, just completely ridiculous, almost childish to a point. And it almost seemed like he didn't even believe it himself. He was just saying it because he was on the show and he wanted to boost his, celebrity credentials or whatever. And I called him out on it immediately afterward, and he quickly deleted the tweet that he put out in defense of his argument. And I think it's people like that who, I'm not saying there aren't honest actors who are working on this issue, or again, issue, a word I hate, but I think it's mostly people like that who are infotainment jockeys, and they try to control the narrative. And he, I think, was just picking up on it because it was something that really hadn't been in the news yet, and it was something that would shock people and get people thinking like, yeah, why are those weirdos, why do they even want to play sports if they're if they want to be women anyway? It was that kind of attitude. And I think those are the people who are trying to shepherd public opinion toward this idea that trans women are trying to hijack sports. And then which also brings into question the issue that, like, what is the primacy of sports? Like, why are sports so important, right? Why is that, like, what the societal factor is that's sort of at the crux of this discussion about trans women? And I think that has to do with capitalism, that has to do with how money is made. And I think there are probably a lot of people out there who are afraid, who make money off of sports, who are afraid of trans women sabotaging their preferred, their clients or who they represent. And I think that's like a big overarching assumption that we need to consider. And I don't, people like Piers Morgan, I don't think they really even care. I think they're just going for the entertainment value, but that's what people
Piers
hear.
Morgan is a has-been, and this is a hornet's nest that he can pick that people will pay attention to him about.
Exactly.
I think that's really the reason that he's that. And I think you give him a little too much credit for, like, cooking this stuff up. He does, no doubt. He fans the Flames,
I give him no credit.
Okay, well,
I
think he fans the Flames because it's something that gets him attention, and I think that's the same, like, Graham Linehan, same thing, like, these people, even Elon Musk sounding off, which is pretty despicable because his wife is non-binary. These are people who, they just want attention, and they know that there's a hornet's nest they can poke, and people will pay attention to them for that.
Yeah,
And
I'm not really worried about the Piers Morgans of the world. I'm more worried about people who are writing laws that impact trans women, who think that they get to decide what a woman is by definition. That, to me, is what scares me. I don't really give a shit. Piers Morgan is a complete shit stain. Like, he's
right.
Like you said, he's a has-been. He's a nobody. I don't care about his opinion. And yes, you're right. He does push a certain narrative, and he does impact public opinion. But I'm more worried about people writing laws.
I just bring him up because he has a substantial platform, and a lot of people, instead of taking the intelligent approach, like you said, Misty, and looking at the laws, they're looking at somebody like this who, has an ideological opinion about what's happening.
You're right.
And that sort of sets, like, the landscape and the parameters of the discussion. And that's why somebody like him is
dangerous.
Yeah. I think he's a completely dishonest actor.
He's certainly entitled to his opinion, absolutely. But I don't think that the way that he approaches anything is productive.
Right.
So yeah, I would rather not waste a lot of time talking about Piers Morgan, really.
I think he's just picking it up and fanning the Flames. Like you said, it's the people who draw the laws, but even deeper than that, because there's obviously so many laws that have, supported these things. Not that long ago, it used to be illegal to wear clothing of the wrong sex. Leslie Feinberg talks about this in Stone Butch Blues, that you had to wear at least three articles of clothing from the gender that you were assigned at birth, or the cops could arrest you and they would strip you down and check you. You know, like this, like it's only very recently that trans people have been able to come out of the shadows and even exist in society. And a lot of people are really disgusted by that because they think that we should be, you know, they should only see us in an underpass after midnight, you know, or that the only legitimate job that we have is as entertainers and sex workers. You know, the notion that somebody could be a respectable thing like a journalist or an athlete or a politician is just anathema to their conception of what a trans person is. So I mean,
even now, the transgender community is still discriminated against based on dress. I mean, there's the whole walking while trans. I mean, transgender women are often arrested for being prostitutes, even if they're not prostitutes and they're just walking down the street. You know, it happens all the time, particularly in New York. I know I've done some research on that when Jesse and I have been batting around the idea of doing like a sex workers' rights show. And that's part of, you know, where my research landed me was, you know, especially in New York, the whole walking while trans thing is a huge problem. And, you know, then they have, you know, a record of solicitation when they aren't even prostitutes. And it's, you know, it's this whole thing where it's just another variation of the same discrimination. You know, so it's, the idea that there's some, generally speaking, I mean, I know Tulsi's a woman of color, but generally speaking, there's some white dude in a suit who's going to decide and define what a woman is terrifying to me. Like that shouldn't be a thing that's happening. So that's where I mean, and, you know, you're right, Jesse, there are people who are influencing public opinion, and that's definitely a problem. Because, you know, once you have
that's the only reason I bring up Piers Morgan. I don't want to give him more attention or certainly no credit. But yeah, no more attention.
The thing is that all of this stuff is really derives from, it's not just a cultural thing, it's not just a legal thing, it's really a material thing. This derives from the way that the capitalist system functions and the way that class society functions and property relations. You know, if you think about like Frederick Engels wrote about like the origins of the family, private property, and the state as like this one massive movement when humanity began that like kind of transition period, or some aspects, you know, of humanity, some cultures, you know, got to a position in the ways that their societies worked where this kind of separation was possible, and the men, you know, were able to establish, you know, had kind of a material incentive to establish dominance over women and, you know, control over their bloodlines and property inheritance and stuff like that, which they were able to deny to other people. And how that development of a class society, that development of a patriarchal like rule of men over women, and the development of a upper class and a lower class and a repressive state apparatus that maintains that system of exploitation and oppression was all created at the same time. And so it's whether it's been like feudalism or, you know, capitalism or whatever, like that's just kind of taken different forms of class oppression, but that oppression of women has remained the same. And so like you said in the intro, I'm also a socialist activist. I'm a member of the Party for Socialism and Liberation. And what we talk about is how LGBTQ oppression and women's oppression are the same thing, how they derive from the same rules. The same things created to oppress women and control women are also used to control LGBTQ people, trans, and, you know, gay, lesbian, bisexual people. Because, and this is actually, it's interesting because this actually ties back to the issue of the bill that we're talking about and the precedents set in U.S. law. Because to explain what I was just saying, I'll saying that's where I'm going. Is that these rules about biological roles. Men are producers, women are reproducers. Women are naturally suited for the roles of housework and child rearing and stuff like that. And men are the fighters and the doers and the builders and, kind of go out and do all of the stuff in the world. And that's kind of like what patriarchy has taught us going back 2, 3, 4,000 years. That's what they've been saying since ancient Mesopotamia. That's what they've been saying. And so from those roles, you get, gay people break the rules, lesbians break the rules, bisexual people break the rules, trans people break the rules in some way or another. Because if you're a man, you're supposed to mate with a woman. If you're a woman, you're supposed to mate with a man. And then it creates a family unit. The family unit supports raising the kids, which ensures that there are more workers to keep working, So, and that is a very big concern of the capitalist system. And that's really the same reason that abortion has become such a tightly controlled issue, because under capitalism, especially in the last 100 years or so, is that it concerns women establishing control over their own reproductive functions rather than being established by men. And it's the same question for trans people, for LGBTQ people. It is a question of reproductive autonomy, of social autonomy, of our right to live the lives that we want to live, independent of these rules created by men, by ruling class men, to maintain their system of oppression. And so the LGBTQ liberation and women's liberation should be united in one big fight, because we are on the same side. We're not a threat to each other. We're not a danger to each other. And all of this stuff, whether it's the bathroom bills or the trans athletes or any of this stuff, is just attempts to divide us against each other so that we fight each other as the enemy instead of uniting to fight the ruling class as the enemy. So that's my socialist feminist take on this issue.
Yeah, and I think an interesting point to bring up is that the focus is on sports. It's on physical performance. It's not on intellect. And I think that says a lot where the focus is. But I want to ask you, Morgan, because way back when, I forget when exactly, Tulsi Gabbard had some quite anti-LGBTQ point of views, and then she sort of tried to perform a mea culpa for them when she was running, and now it seems like she's back to that, I don't know, delusion again. So why do you think she's doing this? Do you have any idea? I think she's a
shrewd politician.
Yeah.
That's what I think she is. This the thing. Back in 2003, like you said, she raged against the I forget what the word, homosexual extremists or something like that, because the fight back then was for marriage equality, and she was angry about that, and she raged against that. And then what she says is, then she enlisted in the army. She went to Iraq, fought in the U.S. occupation war in Iraq, and had this transformation. She says she encountered the repressive strictures of Muslim society and realized that it was wrong to legislate morality, and then came back here and suddenly had this kind of new libertarian attitude about LGBTQ rights and stuff. And so as a result, the Human Rights Campaign, the primary liberal LGBTQ rights, organization in the U.S., has given her like very, very high marks in terms of like how she's voted on LGBTQ rights and stuff.
Yeah, didn't they give her 100% at one point?
They did. They did. Last year they gave her 100%. And she even co-sponsored the Equality Act, which was a sweeping bill that would have banned all forms of discrimination against all LGBTQ people, across American society, it would have been an incredible bill, and it actually passed the House. It of course did not get through the conservative Senate, and I don't need to explain why. But that was, she co-sponsored that.
Wait,
And
you
then
mean Mitch McConnell's not down with that?
I don't know. I mean, it didn't have turtle rights, so who knows? But then, do you remember last year during the primaries in September, and it might have actually been in the first week of October, there were two LGBTQ primary forums. One was an official one, and then one was an unofficial one. And I don't remember the official one, but I remember in the unofficial one, which was hosted by, of course, Anderson Cooper. And
he's great. He's like one of the most adversarial journalists out there.
Yeah, and he's gay, which was both of these qualities are relevant.
Yeah.
But and I will say, as much as I hate Pete Buttigieg, seeing him and Anderson Cooper on the stage, two gay men, talking about, their experiences with homophobia and the AIDS crisis and all the shit that we've gone through, I had a little bit of a moment. I was like, this is actually really cool. But anyway, at that forum,
well, to be fair, even though they are essentially aristocrats, one in the media, one in politics, both of whom would like to lord over us in some way, they still are human beings. They've still had the experience of being gay and coming out. I mean, they live obviously more privileged lives than we do, but I get what you're saying as far as having a moment, because it's rare. It's ridiculously still rare that we get to see that. And even when we get to see it, it's like two of the biggest fucking douchebags you can think of.
Right. It's like well, the thing is when you're such a small percentage of the population, you get used to people talking about you rather than hearing you talk about yourself, collective you. So that was kind of why it was cool, was to kind of realize that, that this is a moment where you have these two guys we can really begin to have this conversation. Obviously we didn't, because Pete Buttigieg is, a walking Raytheon Pride float. But that's not the point. The point is, at that event, Tulsi Gabbard was asked directly about this transformation, and she dodged the question. I was watching it, and my jaw just dropped, because she was asked this question, and she didn't answer it. She turned and immediately went on talking about her war experience and why she opposes a war in Syria. Very important topic to talk about, not what the question was about. She refused to answer the question. And I should send you this tweet that I wrote when it happened. I was like, that's some bullshit. She's dodging. Because the thing is, we remember, okay, the queer community remembers when somebody had said something nasty about us. Right. We know who the dangerous people are. So if somebody like Tulsi Gabbard, she needs to prove herself. And she got up there and said, I have 100%, from Human Rights Campaign, blah, blah, blah. And that's fine. That's satisfying for them. And I was like, okay, that's good for her. But she gave her explanation. And I was actually talking to Mike Preisner about this, about just how racist that answer was that she gave. She was like, we can't persecute the gays because we don't want to be as bad as the Muslims. That's what Tulsi Gabbard said. That's what her statement amounts to.
I mean, if your lexicon still includes the phrase "the gays," I think you need to go into a dark room for a while and think about.
I mean, I was paraphrasing her when I said that.
Right.
But that's what her statement amounts to. That's what it amounts to, is because, and this is the thing, I was saying, people, we don't forget, you know what I mean? I'm still bitter about Human Rights Campaign's response to the murder of Amanda Milan, which was 20 years ago. So this is we remember,
Matthew Shepard, he wasn't trans, but
Right. Well, and that was the thing was, and I mean, Brandon, Tina too, was the reluctance of the LGBT groups to welcome and embrace the cause of trans people. Because for a long time, trans people were seen as like this liability, you know, even as late as 2008, 2009, when the first time they introduced ENDA, the Democrats split the bill. It was supposed to be LGBT people, and they split the LGB into one bill and then put the T in a separate bill because they were afraid that if you asked people to legislate against discriminating against trans people, that they would say no. And so they said, well, we'll at least get it for you know, lesbian, gay, and bisexual people, and then we'll worry about the trans people later. It'll be easier later. That was only 10 years ago that happened. So that's the recent legacy of this attitude that trans people are weighing down the cause of gay rights. But to talk about Tulsi, like, we were always suspicious that she, and that's the thing, is like that question gave her the opportunity to dispel all of the hesitancy and the skepticism about this miraculous transformation that she had, and she really could have won over a lot of people who were still hesitant to embrace her because they liked her other stuff, you know, breaking up the tech giants and, you know, supporting Assange and, you know, supporting civil liberties and stuff. Like, they should have fit together, but she had to just dodge the question in the most obvious way possible. And I was like, this is not good. And so now this is the fruit of that. This proves that people were wrong to believe her. It makes me wonder if her
and that
entire
frustrates
embracing
me.
of LGBTQ rights wasn't just a shrewd maneuver to get into politics, because you can't get involved in politics in the state of Hawaii if you're a Republican. So I think the thing is, she probably convinced herself, or just fucking lied. I don't know, but I don't like to accuse people of lying if I can't prove that they're actually like malicious. But I mean, this bill is nothing short of malicious. But my point being, like, this is such a dramatic reversal. This makes me angry that I have spent years defending her. You know?
Well, okay.
Right.
Here's what makes me mad about that. This is what makes me mad about that.
I'll just quickly admit to that too. I was for several months behind her campaign and championing her, and I thought when she went on Tucker Carlson the one time and spoke out against the US's forever wars, I thought that was excellent. And now, and hopefully we can talk about this in a little bit, but now I question all of that, everything she said and everything she's championed. And if you look at her,
and that's
Council
what
on
makes
Foreign
me mad about
Relations
this, is she has now tainted the idea that people can make a legitimate change of heart. You know, I get really frustrated by people who use these sorts of topics and things for self. I don't even know. I live in small town Ohio, and I'm surrounded by a bunch of small-minded people, generally speaking, you know, a lot of Trump supporters, whatever. It's gotten a lot better, but, you know, it is what it is. But in my own family, my older sister is gay. She's a lesbian. And in my own family, I have had people who I would have never imagined would be accepting of my sister. I mean, they are racist. They are sexist. They are small town Ohio people. And they had a legitimate change of mind and a change of heart. And they are now completely supportive of my sister and the LGBTQ community. Several years ago, my grandmother volunteered at Pride, which I never would have imagined that was something that could happen, you know? It makes me very angry when somebody like Tulsi uses that sort of epiphany or change of heart for personal gain when it's not genuine, because now that makes everybody suspicious of those who have had a genuine change of heart. And it's really kind of disgusting to me to use that as like this sort of political football. And I can feel pretty good about the fact that despite regularly being called a Tulsi stan, I never supported Tulsi Gabbard's campaign. I never supported her candidacy. I was always suspicious of her.
Wait, can I
I
ask
will.
real quick, what the fuck does stan mean?
It means like, okay, so it comes from the Eminem song, where the song "Stan," where it's the guy who's like a hardcore fan, like ends up killing himself because Eminem doesn't write him back. So that's where it comes from. So it just means like you're a hardcore,
That's a
like
that's a
crazy
recent song,
supporter.
right?
It's probably like 10 or 15 years old, but that
Oh,
the
okay.
term "stan" has just really become like kind of a popular
Stan was the
thing
guy's
to accuse
name,
people of
to be
being.
clear.
Yes, it was
Yeah.
the guy's name in the song. But I am regularly called a Tulsi stan, which is weird to me, considering that I'm on record, on video, on Twitter, everywhere, like criticizing her and regularly saying I'm not a fan of hers. She does some good stuff, like her Assange stuff is obviously something I'm a fan of. She just, had the whole repealing of the Patriot Act bill. I'm a fan of that. Like, here's the thing: you can like some things that people do and not like other things that they do. That's okay.
Mhm.
Like
People
I don't
on
know
the
why
internet
that's a
have a hard
controversial
time
thing.
understanding that,
Yeah,
Like
Yeah.
it's like you say one thing, then it's assumed that
Yeah.
you're like totally on the bandwagon. That Jesse, I don't know if you really
Yes.
got that. That's kind of what stan means. Like you're
Means
on the
you're like
bandwagon, you're an
uncritical.
uncritical supporter,
Yeah,
Yes.
like an
yeah,
enthusiastic supporter of it.
Right.
yeah.
So, I mean, I can feel pretty good about the fact. I mean, full disclosure, I did donate to her campaign one time, and that was only so that I did it for her and Mike Gravel both because I wanted to see them on the debate stage. That's the only reason.
Yeah, I mean, I spent a year and a
So,
half defending her in the media, writing
well,
about
I
her because
did
no one else
defend
would talk
her. I
about her.
will say. I will say and apologize now. I did defend her on this issue, on her having this change of mind, because again, in my own family, I've witnessed that happening, and I think that that's something that we should encourage, and that we should, this is a great thing that you changed your mind and you had this awakening or whatever. And so when people do that disingenuously, it really makes me angry. It's like when women falsely accuse men of rape, because then that makes legitimate claims of rape less likely to be believed. Or if do you know what I mean? It's like that same, it's like the boy who cried wolf, and it
False,
really frustrates me.
false anti-Semitism accusations.
So there's
Yes.
actually,
Oh,
this is
yeah.
a useful, this is kind of a slight tangent. I've clicked over to the Twitter thread and people are losing their fucking minds over it. There is one
Ugh.
thing that has come up that I want to address directly because this one impacts me. And that is this notion that transness is a cultural appropriation of Native American Two-Spirit or, Hijras or Kawajasiras from South India or whatever. The idea that trans is foreign to our society and is being imported from someplace else to the harm of other people. And that's an absurd notion because for a couple
Yeah,
of
that's
reasons.
just
One, none of those people invented the idea of gender variance. Now if a non-native person was to say I'm Two-Spirit, that's different because Two-Spirit has the Two-Spirit is itself an umbrella identity created in the 90s, but it describes all these different gender variances and trans and kind of many different ways of gender and sexuality expression across many different native societies. And this is particularly close to me because I'm part Piscataway. My family I'm not a member of the tribe, but my family going back are Piscataways. So this is an issue that I know a great deal about, and the notion that we've stolen it from Native people or something is just ludicrous. Because if you really want to go back to it, the thing is, really, we gave it up. That because before there were these rules, like we talked about, the creation of patriarchy and the woman and the state and all of that stuff, there was no reason for people to have bigoted attitudes. And if you look at societies around the globe that never developed a repressive state apparatus and created those roles, in Southeast Asia, in the Pacific Islands, in North America, in Africa, in Siberia, all over the globe, these identities still exist, and they still exist in not just tolerance but acceptance. And I was actually just reading there's a great book about this called Evolution's Rainbow, which is about gender and sexuality in the animal kingdom and in humans. Really, really cool book. It's by Joan Roughgarden, a trans woman and biologist, and it's a really cool four-gendered fish, like lesbian lizards. It's great. But it's a really cool book. But it also talks about the gender expression and fluidity, and the kind of rainbow of expressions and identities in human society too. And for like two-spirit people, for example, you could there was no imposition of any kind of like physical like transformation. You know what I mean? Like you had two-spirit trans men who just dressed like men did, bare from the waist up, participated in the hunt, in the fighting, all of this stuff. And there was no thought of like, well, they don't look like a man. It was just understood they're a man. Like they have this spirit of the man in them. They're this innate manness, and the physical body is just a vessel for that. And the same way, with two-spirit women, the same kind of just acceptance. There was no idea like, well, you're an inferior type of woman because you can't give birth. You'll never give your husband a child or something like that. Like you're a failure. Like that was just not an attitude that existed. So, and there's obviously, different ways that people have understood this fluidity of gender expression across human society. But all around the globe, there are 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 genders in different societies. You can even find it in the Hebrew Bible. The Jewish law actually recognizes, I think, 6 genders, which is, if I remember right, it's like cisgender male, cisgender female, cisgender male who is sterile, cisgender female who is sterile, trans woman, trans man. And so like there's a different, you know what I mean? So like this notion that like transness is foreign to like Western society or whatever is just absurd. It's just that this is where capitalism was established first, was in Western Europe. And it's had the longest time to impose its truly violent form of gender roles as part of this class society longer than it has anyplace else. So there's a really great book. I know I'm throwing books at you, called Caliban and the Witch, which talks about the incredibly violent way that the power of women and the autonomy of women was destroyed by the creation of capitalism in Europe, and how that centered around the Great Witch Hunt, and how in the New World, when the colonists came here, they brought that with them, and they attacked gender variant people in native society as witches for the exact same reasons that they attacked them in European society. So it was just this violent imposition left and right of this, enforced gender rule that women are defined by their ability to biologically reproduce, and men are defined by, not being that, basically. So like it was these were a part of our society too, I mean, talk about Joan of Arc. Joan of Arc was not killed, but she was not executed because she was French or because she defeated the English. She was executed because she refused to stop dressing like a man. Okay? She cut her hair like a man. She dressed like a man. She adopted, the armor of a man. And if you actually read her trial, what she is condemned and executed for is because she refuses to dress like a woman and go back to being a woman. And that's what they fought her for. So, I mean, people who think that that gender expression outside of the binary or sexuality outside of the heterosexuality is something foreign to Western culture, Western civilization, they're full of shit. They don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
So
I think the point about the binariness is super important because we're all at this point born into that, and it's just again going back to overarching assumptions. It's like, okay, that's the way life is supposed to be. If you're a man, you're supposed to be attracted to and marry a woman. If you're a woman, vice versa. And even though a lot of progress has been made with regard to gay rights, it's still, I mean, I can't believe sometimes that we're still where we are, and that like even that we're talking about this right now, and that it's coming from somebody like Tulsi Gabbard, who I don't think is a stupid person, but I mean, here she's being very stupid. Uh, I don't know what that says about our ability as human beings to understand that we're not binary creatures, that there maybe even are more forms of sexuality than we even know about right now, beyond sex, for example. And I'm just, I'm wondering what you think, given that Tulsi Gabbard is a woman, how this sets back whatever fight is left for women's rights, for trans rights, for gay rights.
I mean, I think you got to remember that like one of the primary forces that killed the Equal Rights Amendment was Phyllis Schlafly. You know, so like there's always been a place for, because here's the thing is, as much as women and LGBTQ people are facing a male created and dominated patriarchy, there's also the class element to this, and class cuts across all of those identities. There are working class women, there are ruling class women, there are working class LGBTQ people, and there are ruling class LGBTQ people, and they still have their material interests, you know? Mm-hmm. So, for working class people, we kind of live the entire contradiction and realize that our fight against the women specific or the trans specific, impositions made against us is also part of the same fight that we're fighting as working class people to secure our right to a living wage, to secure our right to housing, to secure our right to food in our bellies and an education and safety, and all of the things that we want and need it's kind of more readily apparent to working class people that there's a unity in those fights. Mm-hmm. But for ruling class people, it's different, because what they're really fighting for isn't to overthrow the property relations that give them their class status. They just want an equal part in the exploitation that men get to have. And so, and you can see this going all the way back to the suffrage movement, that there was this split, between the interest of the working class women in the suffrage movement, who were also pushing for protections against abuse of husbands, who were also pushing for abortion rights in the 1910s and stuff. They were fighting all this stuff. And then you had the ruling class women who literally only wanted the right to vote, and that was it. And it was white women who wanted the right to vote. They didn't even care if black women got the right to vote. And they were, and if you talk about like Susan B. Anthony and them, they were angry that black men got the right to vote before white women did. Like that was a major split in the suffrage movement in the middle of the 19th century, was the 15th Amendment. So that's, you know what I mean? That's the class divide is there. So I think when you look at and you ask, why do the Phyllis Schlaflys of the world exist, and increasingly now, why do the Tulsi Gabbards, the J.K. Rowlings of the world exist? It's because they have this identity with the other ruling rich people around them, and the structure and the power structure that that keeps that status where it is, and not with the working women who are like them, or the working LGBTQ people, or working people indeed of any stripe, who are of a difference of class. Even if we have the same identity as women with them, that's that's not what they're fighting for. And so while there might be a certain like unity of struggles in certain things, you know what I mean? Like an anti-discrimination bill would be good for all of us, but comes down to it, the people on the top have to maintain that structure, and so the ruling class women don't want to overthrow the system. They just want to carve out a safe spot for themselves in that system, and that's really what I think this is. This is cis women in this specific instance. This is a cis woman who is trying to throw trans women under the bus in order to secure a spot for cis women in this structure. The obvious answer to this issue is to overthrow the class system and abolish this distinction and abolish the differences, the material differences between men and women, so that we don't have to protect people as a special status anymore. That's what that protection is. That protection is a little spot that we've carved out through our struggle, where they gave us this in the interest of forestalling a greater rebellion, you know? And that's where a lot of these things come from. These are forms that we fought for and won. And so I actually, hang on, I need to switch over to my speakers.
Microphone is dying. Can you guys still hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So good. Where was I?
Well, you were talking about the class component.
Now I can't hear you.
You can't hear me?
Oh,
Yeah.
I can't. I can't really hear her much either.
I can hear
Much
you
quiet,
fine,
yeah.
I can hear you fine, Misty.
Yeah.
Hold on. Let me try taking my headphones out. Maybe that's.
Battery died.
No, I can't hear you now, Jesse.
You can't hear me,
Oh, now I can. Now I can.
Morgan?
I can't hear her.
Yeah, Morgan. It says your microphone is off.
Are you muted?
I think I got it now.
Okay.
I had,
Yeah.
to switch Skype over in addition to my computer. I don't know why that was.
It happens. Oh, I can't hear you now.
Freaking out.
I can hear you, but
It's very faint.
Yeah, it's faint.
All right.
Say again?
All right. I'm going to stop touching things because it seems to be working right now.
That sounds better.
Yeah, I can hear you. It's still a little faint, but I can hear you.
Yeah, I'm on my computer now. I'm not actually sure how well this is going to work. The battery's died on my headset.
That's fine. We can try to like get it wrapped. We can try to like get it wrapped up. I mean, I think we've, kind of dug into it a little bit. I don't know.
Am I louder now?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Okay. I had to change the input stuff on Skype.
Okay. Yeah, you're good.
Anyway, where was I? Ruling class women. And
Yeah.
I guess I basically made my point. Is that like we're fighting for fundamentally different things. They want a spot for themselves carved out in the system, and we're fighting to overthrow the system. And that's really what it amounts to.
Yeah, and I think it's also a way that, as they always do, this is a way of, dividing people. You take these emotionally charged, hot button topics and, throw them out there every now and again to keep, the pores fighting amongst themselves rather than paying attention to what the actual problem is, which is, the ruling class and capitalism. So, I mean, that's always something that they do. That's, a huge part of their playbook. And I think this is probably just one of them. another instance of it happening. But with Tulsi, I think the biggest thing that I find frustrating with her on this issue is just the it's not even really hypocrisy, I guess, because that would imply that she actually did have a genuine change of heart. It's this manipulation and using such an important subject and such a marginalized group of people for personal gain, only to then throw them under the bus when it's politically convenient for her to do so. And that seems really gross. And again, I've always been very suspicious of her, as I am with all politicians. I don't like there's not a single politician that I like, trust, respect, none of them.
Not even Joe Biden?
No, I know that will surprise you. Not even Joe Biden.
Wow.
So yeah, it's just, and then for, having her supporters go to bat for her, throughout the primary and defend her on this issue. And even myself, as I said before, I wasn't a supporter, but I did defend her on this issue. A lot of people were giving her shit. Kudos to those people who saw through her. I mean, I'll give you the props to that. But just from my own personal experience, I thought, well, maybe she did really have a genuine change of heart. I'm sure going to war is a transformational, there's no way it couldn't be a transformational experience. And so maybe she really did, have this sort of realization while she was there and, genuinely changed her mind. And so, I'll be the first to admit I was wrong on that. But, it's really frustrating to me seeing this issue used as a political football. I mean, they do this with every issue. Sorry, Jesse, I keep saying issue. I know you hate that word. But to me,
I can't help it either.
I know. To me, using people who are already marginalized and in danger just merely for existing is a really shitty thing to do. And to now be throwing those same people under the bus after having used them for years for political gain, it's just really gross to me. And, again, I'm not pretending to be an expert on this subject at all. I mean, there's no way I could possibly know, which is why we wanted to have you on, because you have, this is your lived experience. So, for me, it's more about learning, but even coming from a place where I can on some level understand the concerns that people may have with allowing transgender women to participate in athletic competition. I can understand where that comes from, because I think that those people are not informed. Maybe they don't have all the information. And like you said, there's a lot of fear mongering and just crap, that gets put out into the narrative, and, people ingest that stuff and they take it on board, and it's hard for them to really look at something with, with nuance and to really look at things past surface level. And then when you add the emotional, aspect of it, where this is already something that people get riled up about for whatever reason, it's really hard to, take a step back and just talk about it and listen to each other. And I think that's really what's missing. And just that's why, I'm really happy to have done this, because I'm hoping that people can, because I didn't know much about this. And so it's okay to admit you don't know something about something, and it's okay to ask questions and listen and learn and all of those things, but you need to be willing to do that. You can't, make a snap judgment. I mean, I had people on Twitter asking me to comment on this bill, and I'm like, I haven't even read it. I don't really know much about it. Why am I going to comment on something that I'm completely ignorant about? That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
I would much rather inform myself first and, figure out where I stand on the issue, because, my snap judgment was, okay, this is some turf shit, what the fuck is she doing? But I had to take a step back from that and realize, that's my initial emotional reaction, being somebody who does support the LGBTQ community, and I need to stop. You don't know anything about this, recognize your ignorance and go inform yourself. And that's really what I set out to do. That's why I wanted to do this. I hope other people can, take a step back from their own bullshit and do that with more issues. It's not always easy. But yeah, this is a conversation that needs to be had, but it needs to be had in a real way. You can't just, scream at each other and, not be willing to hear other people. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's why I'm really thankful that we're doing this show, because it really gives us a chance to kind of take things apart piece by piece and say, like, what is the claim? What is the underlying assumption that, supports that claim, and, what is really the facts?
Yeah, and I think it's important to emphasize, too, that Tulsi Gabbard, her retinue, any politician, they don't have any natural right to legislate for us, whether it pertains to our sexuality, whether it pertains to our freedom of speech. They don't have that right. The Constitution, as much as it's lauded ad nauseum, is not written in stone. And I think for Tulsi Gabbard to think or assume or to embrace the entitlement that she has purview over deciding this is just, it speaks to how there's something sociopathic about it. And I don't care that she served in Iraq. I don't believe her anymore with regard to opposing regime change wars. And also, if you go on her page on the Council on Foreign Relations site, she's a staunch supporter of Israel. I posted some screenshots. I saw what you
posted.
People can go see that, and she's supported giving what's called lethal aid, but weapons essentially to Ukraine, which are being funneled to neo-Nazis like the Azov Battalion, or the Azov Brigade, I should say, or maybe it's battalion. I forget. There are so many. Yeah, there are lots of Nazis in Ukraine, so I get mixed up.
It's hard to keep them all straight.
It really is.
So I think this for her, I mean, in my opinion, is a death blow. I mean, I'm sure she's still going to have her coterie of fans or followers, but I think this is kind of an unmasking of sorts. And
there's a lot of that going on right now, but I think you're right. Yeah. But I think that I don't think it necessarily is a death blow, because I think that she is carving out a position with, sort of the more libertarian conservative, which even I would be surprised if libertarians supported this, because it's really kind of an overreach, and it's more government involvement, and it's more, so I'm not even sure how
libertarians would say abolish Title IX.
Right.
They would say that the government shouldn't be intruding it in the first place, what they would say, which is not really what we want either.
Right.
Yeah, Title IX is important. I just want to make it clear, as much as I am being critical of her law, and all of that stuff, like, Title IX is an essential element.
Absolutely.
And that ensures women's equality. Just the point is that trans women are not a threat to that equality.
Right.
Yeah. No, not at all. I think maybe the opposite is the case. I mean, more inclusion and more, to me, it seems like being more welcoming and accepting is a boon to feminism, and it's it's beneficial to society in general, but I mean specifically to women. I mean, women need to kind of stick together and support each other, at least as long as we live in this ridiculous patriarchy. I mean, this is a fight that we have to take on together. And again, I get that there are those people who don't think that trans women are women and that they're men pretending to be women. And those people, that's a much bigger conversation. But I think that there are a lot of people who are getting sucked into, just the drama surrounding all of this. And again, I think people have a tendency to just react emotionally and immediately. And that's why I wanted to take a step back and, really look into it. Because this is a really, it sounds weird to say, but it is a really important subject matter. It seems weird to think that, oh, it's just sports, but it's not just sports. It's a much bigger issue. This is a much, and again, for me, my thought kept constantly going back to trans youth. And to be, a 10, 12, 14-year-old kid who's already struggling because society doesn't accept you for who you are, and to be trying to fit in like all kids are, but then to have those extra levels of otherness and, all of those things, and to be going through puberty and to be dealing with all of those things, and then to also be excluded from, oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, you reminded me of a part about this that we did not get a chance to talk about, which is how would it be enforced?
Right.
Yeah.
If her thing did get through, how would it be enforced? And that's the really nefarious part about this, because you can look at some of the other bills. Like I said, these bills have been passed all across the country, and what they have done is they would require you to prove that you're not trans if you're accused of it. And I just want to just think about that. Like you would have to, that means it has to be on your ID card. That means, or you have to consent to a physical examination, or you have to get a doctor's note.
Yeah.
But you're trans until proven otherwise,
And that's
the
incredibly
notion that
invasive.
We should have to carry, that trans people should have to carry an ID that outs them as trans at all times.
As if being trans means you're a natural threat to anything or anybody, right?
Right, because here's the thing: if it's on your ID, then the bartender is going to see it too. The police officer is going to see it too. Like anybody who looks at the guy at the liquor store who sells you your bottle of wine is going to see it too. Like all of this, they just want us to be out and visible, as trans all the time. And
that
because
puts trans people in danger.
Yes, it does.
It
does.
And it allows them, meaning the people in the system, the capitalist system, the system of government that we have in this country, it allows them easier control over you. It allows them to monitor you. It allows them to sell things to you. And I think that's, whether Tulsi Gabbard realizes it or not, that's what she is adding to. And I think she's smart enough to know that. And the fact that she's still going along with it is disgusting.
There is a real kind of, overarching police state element to this, that is, aimed at policing people's identities. And it's really nefarious, when you really think about how would it actually work and what would it actually mean.
Well, and even if you aren't required to have it like on your ID, the fact that you would be required to prove your gender or your transness or non-transness is incredibly invasive.
Right.
I'm a big fan of privacy. I'm a civil liberties girl. Like I like privacy. I like freedom of speech. I have no time for the government, requiring medical documentation of my gender for me to do something, or anything like that. That shouldn't even be a topic of conversation. That's ridiculous to me. So the fact that that's I'm so glad that you brought that up. How do they enforce it, and what are the requirements? Like we said earlier, like the NCAA has its own requirements, and then different states have different requirements, and different high schools have different requirements. And so what happens to how is it enforced? What is it going to be, like a federal mandate where everywhere across the board's the same? Because if it's not, what happens if there's a trans girl who lives in Michigan who moves to Florida? What happens to her then? I mean, is she subjected to different requirements and different? I mean, it just seems like a really gross kind of slippery slope of control and and really not even just the police state, but more of this is just additional surveillance state.
Yeah, and you want to
apparatus.
talk about what's unfair to athletes. Here's what would happen. I'll tell you exactly what would happen. You got your star athlete on your team, right? Like the person, they score a hat trick every game. They're always up there. They got that killer hit. They knock people out. And then before the championship game, before the big deciding game, somebody from the other team, a concerned parent, comes up and says, I think that person's a transsexual. And then now they can't play until they prove that they're not trans.
Mm-hmm.
That person sits out of the game. Okay, how is that fair to them? You
Right.
know?
Yeah.
Well, how is that humane in any way?
It's not.
It's ridiculous, and I think it speaks to this sort of mental constipation so much of us have collectively that can't get past the binary that we were talking about earlier, that it's just male and female. And what Tulsi's doing, whether she knows it or not, is she's confining identity and to these, two very constricted categories. And she's also shutting down future. It shouldn't even be an opportunity. Like, people should just be free to love who they love and be themselves. I think that goes without saying. But because we live in this capitalist system, because there are strictures on us, because we are subject to control from various illegitimate forces, it's like, I mean, it's so many people, you mention transsexualism to them and their heads are about to fucking explode. Like it's, like you're talking about, I don't know, just something out of this world, and it's not. And I think that's what's really disturbing about it, and also really dangerous, is that we haven't evolved enough to understand that our conception of sexuality, of gender, is not only is it arbitrary, but it's so primitive and undeveloped, and there's so much more that we need to learn, and so much more that we can apply to it if we even want to stick with a gender-based system, which is another question in and of itself. But I'm fully on the side of trans rights, and I think this law is despicable. I'm not surprised that Tulsi is involved with it, especially after she, in my opinion, other people disagree with me, but she walked off the field and joined Joe Biden's team. But
she did.
Yeah, I think it's I don't know, it's almost like sexual militarism. It's like her latent militarism is coming out, and she's applying it to.
I don't trust anybody that's currently serving
control.
in the United States military.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to lampoon her. I'm just saying that it's.
No, I get it.
I really think this law, or this bill she's attempting to pass, is, not just outrageous, but it's abominable.
And that's the thing that I don't think we've really touched on here. Is she really trying to pass it? She leaves office in a couple weeks. So what is the point of this?
Right, that's the biggest mystery for me, is like, what is this? She leaves office in like 6 weeks. You know, when she introduced it, she had 6 weeks left in office. Why? Why did she feel the need to get on the record now as a fucking hypocrite? As this despicable person? Like, is she just does she plan on retiring from politics and is like making sure she never has the opportunity to come back? Because that's what's gonna fucking happen. She's never getting back in office now.
I think it just seems, and especially given like the I mean, and I'm not discounting the importance of trans rights or trans rights in sports or anything like that, but I don't know if you guys noticed, there's a lot of shit going on right now that needs like emergency attention. And so the fact that this is some like random out of nowhere thing that she decides to address seems really weird to me. I just don't, it doesn't make any sense.
She was always lying, that this was like her last hurrah, and she can't contain it anymore, and she's been waiting for a long time to do this, and she's gonna get it done before she leaves office. You know, like, that's the thing. That's the only reason somebody would do something like that right now. You know? There's no posturing for a future thing, unless she plans on teaming up and running for office with Kelly Loeffler in 2024. Like,
right.
You know what I mean? Like, this is just... there's no political justification for it. It's got to be a personal vendetta.
I think.
Maybe everybody's right. Maybe she is angling for a job on Fox News. You know?
well, Morgan, I agree with you. I would say 99%, but I think there is a careerist aspect to it, and she's probably banking on cooling her heels back at the Council on Foreign Relations when she leaves office. And I encourage anybody who's listening or watching to visit that website, because you really get to see basically like the embodiment of neoconservatism, and she's involved with that. She's been involved with that. You can look at the screenshots that I posted on Twitter of her unequivocal support for Israel and for providing, again, lethal aid to Ukraine. And you can make your own decision. But yeah, I agree with you, Morgan. I think it's just 99% like nefarious, and I don't know what she's thinking, but I think there is a careerist aspect to it. She wants to go back to her, what are those comfortable chairs called? The Aeron chairs or whatever? Her Aeron chair at the Council on Foreign Relations. The comfortable computer chairs.
Oh, of course, the chairs at the Council on Foreign Relations. We all know that.
Yeah.
Something you want to tell us, Jesse?
No, all of which is to say that I think she does have a careerist aspect to it, and
maybe you're right. I'm just pulling stuff out of the hat. I have no fucking idea what's going on.
It's just weird. It is weird. To me, I sat here and tried to think, like, what is the point of this? Like, what? And I cannot think of any good reason why this is something she would be doing right now. It doesn't make any sense. You're about to leave office. She's been introducing a lot of bills. A lot of them are really solid pieces of legislation. The Assange, the Snowden, the espionage, the Patriot Act, all of these things are amazing. And I highly suggest that everybody support those pieces of legislation. And just so you know, you can support those pieces of legislation without supporting Tulsi Gabbard, the person. I don't know why that's a weird thing for people, but you can do so. Yeah. But it just seems like such a out of nowhere thing. And again, it's not that I'm discounting the importance of trans rights, but there are a lot of things going on right now. I mean, a shit ton of people are about to be kicked out of their houses. More people are losing their jobs. We still don't have health care. We are still fighting in 7, 8, 9, 10 countries. There's a lot of shit going on. So for this to be like one of the last things that she presents to Congress is just really bizarre. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So I would love for somebody to ask her these questions. I doubt anybody ever does, because our media sucks so incredibly bad. But it would be great for somebody to actually ask her these tough questions and to get an answer on it, because I'm genuinely curious what this is all about. What is the purpose? Why are you doing this now? Where does this come from? So, because it's just really strange to me. So Is there anything else about this that you think that we missed, or that we should be talking about, or that, maybe we forgot to touch on? I just want to make sure that you feel like we covered this in a like cohesive and good way, where we got everything that needs to be. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah.
Well, again, I'm not the expert. I'm here to learn.
The one thing that I would mention is that in June, the Supreme Court ruled on a trio of cases that they said that Title VII of the Civil Rights Act protects LGBTQ people from employment discrimination. And the language in which they looked at that case, the three cases, it was two gay men and a trans woman who were the people suing, and the way that the court, and it's really interesting because Neil Gorsuch, a conservative constitutional literalist, was the one who wrote the majority opinion. And so he approaches it from a kind of very logical, the way that literalists do. And so what he did was he looked at, I mean, there's what he concluded was that unequivocally the protection against discrimination based on sex stereotypes, which the court had previously ruled upon, that the language of sex. He didn't cite Price Waterhouse versus Hopkins, which was the precedent case, but he did. I don't think he did anyway. It's been a long 6 months since June, but what he argues is that sex discrimination against LGBTQ people is discrimination based on sex. So. And I've talked before about, like, you can check out my segment on By Any Means Necessary about that ruling and taking that apart more. But suffice to say, the language in which the court defined sex and LGBTQ identities makes it pretty clear in my mind that Tulsi Gabbard's reading of Title IX is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
She argues that this bill is clarifying, that this makes it clear exactly what Title IX was supposed to mean. But I mean, what are you going to? You're going to tell me that they purposefully protected trans people from discrimination in Title VII, but then decided to allow it in Title IX? 8 years later, like, that's nonsense. But if when you talk about discrimination based on sex, you're necessarily talking about discrimination based on stereotypes of what sex should be. And stereotypes about what sex should be includes appearance and identity and includes sexuality. Mm-hmm. Just like we were talking about. Like, the rules say that being a man and being a woman, being a straight man and a straight woman, like, those are the rules. So if you're gay or if you're trans in whatever way, you're breaking those rules. And the civil rights legislation in this country has been found by the Supreme Court to be naturally inclusive of trans people in that existing language. So the thing is, after the Supreme Court ruled that, an Idaho court overruled one of these laws that got passed earlier in the year that attacked trans athletes and said the court's language says this law is bullshit. And that's why Tulsi introduced this bill. If you read her statement, which is in my article, if you read her statement, she says some states have been misinterpreting Title IX. So what she's saying is we have to correct the law because the Supreme Court doesn't know the law as well as I do.
Yeah. And if you read the statement from the District Court of Idaho, which was written by David Nye, district judge, the logic is, I think, infallible, and I think you really have to do some mental gymnastics to get to where Tulsi is. But here's what it says, quote, "The state has not identified a legitimate interest served by the act," and we're talking about the act you were just talking about, not Tulsi's, but the 1972 Act, correct? Is that the one that's being referred to?
I'm not sure what you're talking about. Let me look at the article.
Okay, so here, I'll just read the quote, and
No, that act in the quote from the district judge refers to the Idaho law that he is overturning.
Okay. Thanks for
That's what he's saying, is
clarifying.
this law doesn't address anything that the Idaho law had already addressed based on our understanding of, what these words mean in a legal context in the United States.
Right.
That's what he's saying.
Yeah. I mean, that was pretty much the quote I was going to read. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know what else to say. I just going back to what Misty was saying. It seems to be coming out of beyond left field and doesn't make any sense. So
Right field, I would say.
Yeah, it's really coming out of right field.
Yeah.
Really
Well, yeah. That's a better metaphor.
Yeah.
But that's really about it. I think after that we've really kind of exhausted this. I
Yeah.
mean, we could get into some of the specific studies and stuff about like just how long does it take for hormone therapy to affect, and like things like that or whatever.
I would love to do that. I would love to do that with you at some point. I mean, maybe not. I mean, just about any of these issues, because, sorry, Jesse, I said issues again. Damn it. But I mean, I consider myself to be
just pronounce it issues, okay?
issues.
That's like a Christopher
Okay.
Hitchens, like.
Yeah. I mean, I consider myself to be fairly well informed on LGBTQ stuff. I mean, I've been a longtime ally and friend. I go to Pride and all that stuff, but I feel like I can always know more. And, I'm always interested in, especially something where there's no possible way I could know. Like, I can't have that lived experience. So I enjoy talking to people who do have that lived experience, because I think that's the best way to learn anything. So yeah, I mean, I would love to have those conversations. I think you're right. I think we've probably pretty much exhausted this. I hope that we have done a good job of trying to cover this in a sort of nuanced way, in a fair way, and really examine, where everybody's coming from in a real way. That was kind of my goal. I want, people to understand that it's okay to not know about something. It's okay to admit that and say, maybe I need to learn more about this, and maybe I need to not have an opinion until I do know more about it. I mean, that's kind of how I always approach stuff. Yeah, I mean, that's how I always, I don't like to have an opinion on something unless I know what I'm talking about. So, I mean, I'm a very opinionated person, but if I have an opinion on something, you can bet I've done my homework. I promise you that. So yeah, I hope that this will encourage more people to, do more research and have these conversations. It is a very hot button topic. So it's something that people find difficult to have real conversations about. So I'm hoping that in doing this and continuing these conversations in a real way, we can kind of encourage those to continue, moving forward. But just thank you. Thank you for indulging my curiosity and, teaching me. I've learned a shit ton today. I'm excited to go and check out the books that you mentioned. And, I may be hitting up your Twitter DMs with questions and all of that stuff. So yeah, I mean, that's why I'm really happy that we could have you on, because I knew you would be down for having, an honest, and I knew you wouldn't, be offended by the fact that I don't have like a set opinion, or, that I don't really know what I'm talking about or whatever. So I knew you would be open to having this conversation with us and letting me ask silly questions and, just kind of pick your brain and learn. So that's really what my only intention was here. So yeah, I mean, I'm glad that we
ask the silly questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll just say to anybody who's watching or listening, or however you experience this show, if you disagree with what we say, or if you agree with what we say, hit us up on Twitter and just provide a cogent argument. Don't be a dick. I know, like, the it's always tempting to be a dickhead or a smartass on Twitter, and I've fallen victim to that as well. But this is a conversation we want to continue having, and we're willing to listen to other perspectives, and we're not saying we're going to agree with them necessarily, but I'll use this cliche word. It's a contentious issue, and again, we want to keep having the conversation. And hopefully eventually be able to put it to rest and realize
Wouldn't that be nice?
how silly we were.
One day.
Yeah.
We're
So,
working
because I know a lot of people on Twitter have something to say about this, and that's fine. You know, everybody's entitled to their opinion, but
towards.
a lot of people like to come at us talking shit, and I just think this is, I mean, with any issue we cover, but this issue in particular, since we're talking about it now, it's an important issue, and it's not worthy of shit talking and doxing and whatever the hell else goes on Twitter to smear people and
I'm used to it.
get them suspended or
It's sad we have to say that, isn't it? Because I mean, it happens to me too.
yeah. So yeah, that's just to anybody who's watching. Like, if you come at us like for real, we'll talk to you. We'll have a real conversation. Like, we're not out to be assholes. So
Well, sometimes I am.
yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm just emphasizing that because I think this is an important issue that's going to get even more important in the future, and I think we need to start the serious conversation about it now and not talking shit that's based on our fears or our prejudices. And
and just be open. That's all. I mean, listen, it's okay to not know where you stand. That's okay. Just be open. Like, I didn't, coming into this, I wasn't really sure where I stood. I mean, I you know, kind of had an idea where I stood, and I had, you know, done some reading and some research and all of that stuff, but I'm still kind of just forming, you know, the basis, like the foundation of my knowledge on this. So that's okay. That's okay, you guys. No one person can be an expert on every single subject. I mean, there are plenty of things I know nothing about. You know,
there is one exception to the people who may respond, though, and that's the religious people who will call somebody,
I will mock
like
you,
Morgan, a sinner or somebody who's going to hell. And if you're watching now, you can fuck off because first,
I will mock you. I will drag you on Twitter. I will bring my friends. Don't even bother.
I'm not even gonna explain. Just fuck off.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I mean, you can respond if you want. We're not
because
gonna.
I can mock you.
I'm not a blocker or somebody who tells people not to say anything. But you really fuck off.
I block people who come at me for no reason except to pick a fight.
Well,
I like to mute people. I'm not really a big blocker. I'll block you if I think you're like a risk of like mass reporting me or something like that. But I like to mute people because then they can just yell into the abyss and I don't even hear them. So whatever. But yeah, if you're going to come at me and start telling me that my friend Morgan is going to hell, then you can just fuck right off.
Because I already live there.
Okay, so yeah, I think that we've taken up a plenty of your time. So thank you again for being so generous and speaking to us about all of this stuff. I genuinely appreciate you doing this and your insight and all of those things. You know, like I said, I've learned a lot today. So seriously, thank you for doing this.
You guys being willing to talk about this topic, you know, and to really give a trans person's, you know, perspective on this, because it is something that is kind of missing from these conversations, you know.
Absolutely.
So I very much appreciate us, because like we said at the beginning, most people just don't know, you know. They get hit with the fear mongering and the emotional stuff, and they're kind of short on the facts, and you really just need to take it apart and really kind of, you know, say what is this, what is that, and just kind of trust people that they will you know, once they have the information, that they will, you know, kind of come around.
And we have to really start embracing not being afraid of each other and actually being interested in each other. And it's not about tolerance. I hate that word. It's about
me too.
Nurturing each other. And that's what we need to do.
Another thing, stop being afraid of these these types of topics. Like there, you don't hear about, nobody in independent media covers this unless they're just, already have a preconceived idea about Tulsi or whatever, and they just are using it as an excuse to bash her. And whatever, that's fine. But what's missing is a real conversation, like a real look at what's happening and the underlying concerns and all of those things, and looking at it in a fair-minded way, and just approaching it in looking below surface level. So stop being afraid of talking about these things. Is there a chance that Jesse and I are going to get labeled as something or whatever? Of course there is, but I don't care. You can do whatever you want. I know who I am. So I'm not going to be afraid to touch controversial topics because somebody might call me a bad word. Come at me, bro. I got no problem with that. It's fine. So I'd much rather give a voice to these issues and a voice to trans women and their experience than to not. So don't be afraid of these topics. Like if you're in independent media, don't be scared. It's okay. These things need to be talked about. It really does. So
we're nice. We don't bite.
One of the huge underlying problems is that it's considered a controversial topic. Yes.
But that again is because of the fear mongering and all of that stuff, which is why I'm glad we did this, because we need to start breaking through that crap.
Yeah, there are a lot of structural issues that I think need to be deconstructed in maybe a Lacanian way or some such method, but there are so many assumptions in this. I don't even want to say debate. It's not a debate. Like there's nothing to debate here. I don't understand why this is. I understand because people are afraid. I think fear is another overarching problem here.
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily a debate. I think it's just a conversation that needs to be had so that people can actually have facts, like Morgan said.
Yeah.
I mean, people just need to have the facts presented to them. So, but anyways, thank you so much, Morgan Artyukhina, for being our guest today. She's a writer for Sputnik, been published in a couple other different publications, and is just a truly badass activist. Does a lot of amazing work, and I highly recommend following her on Twitter. It's Lavender in Red, right?
Mm-hmm. Letter N, and then the colors lavender and red. So.
Yep. So follow her on Twitter, check out all their work, and thank you so much for being here, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Morgan.